ॐ विश्वंदर्पण दृश्यमान नगरी तुल्यन्निजान्तर्गतम् पश्यन्नात्मनि मायया बहिर्गोद्भूतं यथा निद्रया यस्साक्षात् कुरुते प्रबोध समये स्वात्मानमेवाद्वयम् तस्मै श्री गुरुमूर्तये नमः इदं श्री दक्षिणामूर्तये नारायणं पद्मभुवं वसिष्ठं शक्तिं च तत्पुत्र पराशरं च व्यासं शुकं गौडपदं महान्तं गोविन्द योगीन्द्रमथास्य शिष्यं श्रीशङ्कराचार्यमथास्य पद्मपादं च हस्तामलकं च शिष्यं तन्तोटकं वातिककारमन्यान् अस्मद्गुरून् सन्ततमानतोऽस्मि श्रुतिस्मृतिपुराणानाम् आलयं करुणालयं नमामि भगवत्पादं शङ्करं लोकशङ्करं शङ्करं शङ्कराचार्यं केशवं बादरायणं सूत्रभाष्यकृतौ वन्दे भगवन्तौ पुनः पुनः परब्रह्मनिष्ठं स्वतो धर्मनिष्ठं अहिंसैकनिष्ठं स्वशिष्यै सुजुष्टं यतीनां वरिष्ठं गुरूणां गरिष्ठं दयानन्दरूपं मदाचार्यमीडे नमः श्री परमार्थाय संसाराध्यासनाशिने श्रोत्रिय ब्रह्मनिष्ठाय तस्मै ब्रह्मविदे नमः सदाशिवसमारम्भां शङ्कराचार्यमध्यमाम् अस्मदाचार्यपर्यन्तां वन्दे गुरुपरम्पराम् ॐ पार्थाय प्रतिबोधितां भगवता नारायणेन स्वयं व्यासेन ग्रथितां पुराणमुनिना मध्ये महाभारतम् अद्वैतामृतवर्षिणीं भगवतीम् अष्टादशाध्यायिनीम् अम्ब त्वामनुसन्दधामि भगवद्गीते भवद्वेषिणीम् नमोऽस्तु ते व्यासविशालबुद्धे पुल्लारविन्दायतपत्रनेत्र येन त्वया भारततैलपूर्णः प्रज्वालितो ज्ञानमयः प्रदीपः प्रपन्नपारिजाताय स्तोत्रवेत्रैकपाणये ज्ञानमुद्राय कृष्णाय गीतामृतदुहे नमः सर्वोपनिषदो गावो दोग्धा गोपालनन्दनः पार्थो वत्स सुधीर्भोक्ता दुग्धं गीतामृतं महत् वसुदेवसुतं देवं कंसचाणूरमर्दनं देवकी परमानन्दं कृष्णं वन्दे जगद्गुरुम् भीष्मद्रोणतटा जयद्रथजला गान्धारनीलोत्पला शल्यग्राहवती कृपेण वहनी कर्णेन वेलाकुला अश्वत्थामविकर्णघोरमकरा दुर्योधनावर्तिनी सोत्तीर्णा खलु पाण्डवैरणनदी कैवर्तकः केशवः पाराशर्यवचः सरोजममलं गीतार्थगन्धोत्कटं नानाख्यानककेसरं हरिकथा सम्बोधनाबोधितं लोके सज्जन षट्पदैरहरहः पेपीयमानं मुदा भूयाद् भारत पंकजं कलिमला प्रध्वंसि न श्रेयसे मूकं करोति वाचालं पंगुं लंघयते गिरिं यत्कृपातमहं वन्दे परमानन्दमाधवम् यं ब्रह्मा वरुणेन्द्र रुद्रमरुतः स्तुन्वन्ति दिव्यैस्तवैः वेदैः साङ्गपदक्रमोपनिषदैः गायन्ति यं सामगाः ध्यानावस्थिततद्गतेन मनसा पश्यन्ति यं योगिनः यस्यान्तं न विदुःसुरासुरगणाः देवाय तस्मै नमः देवाय तस्मै नमः I welcome you all to the 11th class of our Bhagavad Gita study. In the last class, we were looking at the 11th verse of the second chapter, which we will read now. Ashocyananvashocastvam
अशोच्यानन्वशोचस्त्वम्
प्रज्ञावादांश्च भाषसे
प्रज्ञावादाश्च भाषसे
गतासूनगतासूंश्च
गतासूनगतासूंश्च
नानुशोचन्ति पण्डिताः
नानुशोचन्ति पण्डिताः.
Bhagavan Sri Krishna started the teaching of the Bhagavad Gita with this verse, where Bhagavan says, Nanushocanti panditaha, panditaha na anushocanti. So we saw panditaha refers to the Atma Jnanis, Atma Jnaninaha na anushocanti. The Atma Jnanis do not grieve. And what don't they grieve for? He says, Gatasun, Gatasunschya. For the people who are dead, or for those who are living. Means he has covered the two possibilities that are there. In effect, implying that the Atma Jnanis do not grieve for anything. And since death also does not cause grief to the Atma Jnanis, death being a very powerful event, then that implies that the lesser events obviously don't cause grief also. Lesser events, like we discussed, the loss of a job or a loss of a relationship, etc. So then what is the difference? What does the Panditaha, what does the Atma Jnani have that the Ajnani does not have? What is the difference? So as we saw, the difference is only in Atma Jnanam, nothing else. Physically, there is no change. The difference is only in Atma Jnanam. So then the question is, what is the connection between Atma Jnanam and not grieving? And as we saw, the question is somewhat similar to asking what is the connection between immunity and not falling sick. A person who has immunity has a certain shield that prevents the person from falling into sickness. Whereas a person who does not have this immunity gets sick now and then, anytime there are some germs around. So similar is the situation here. The Atma Jnani has got the Atma Jnanam, and the Atma Jnanam acts as a shield against plunging into grief. On the other hand, person who doesn't have the Atma Jnanam, meaning that the person has ajnana. And such a person keeps falling into grief now and then. So then the question is, what is the connection between this ajnanam and falling into grief? And as we saw, the connection is that grief is a product of jnanam. Grief is a product of ignorance. So then the next question is, how can grief be a product of ignorance? So we say that when the reality is not known, because of ajnana, because of ignorance, then the reality is mistaken to be something else. And that mistake is what results in the grief. Like we saw, when a person doesn't see a rope for a rope, then the person invariably mistakes the rope to be something else, like a snake. And then seeing the snake, he has a lot of anxiety and fear, worry and grief. We can imagine a situation where the person says, look here, the snake has visited our house today, and tomorrow is my daughter's marriage. This has brought such a bad omen to the entire house. And he begins to grieve. Now let's imagine that there is another person there who has done some inquiry and found out that what is there really is a rope. Then he is a rope jnani, a panditaha. So does he grieve? He doesn't grieve. On the other hand, he tells this person, Ashocyan anvashochaha tvam, that you are grieving over something that is not deserving of grief. We can take another example also. Let's imagine that there is a play that is going on. There are actors who have been practicing for this for a long time, and now they're presenting it in front of the audience. And there is a certain scene there where something untoward happens, a certain situation. And the role of the person there, the actor, is that the actor has to cry there and express grief there. Now something happens, and during that scene, the actor who's playing that role forgets that I am the actor, and then takes the character and the costume and the role to be the reality. So he has forgotten the reality that I am the actor and has mistaken something else to be the reality. And now this actor starts to cry there. And the acting looks very realistic at that point. So the audience appreciates the acting. But now what happens? That the scene ends and all the actors leave the stage. But the actor stays there on that stage and continues to grieve, continues to grieve. Now people realize something is amiss now. And so they try to drag that actor out of the scene, and the actor refuses to leave, continues to grieve. Then what do the people around the actor who has forgotten that he is the actor, what do they tell him? Ashocyan anvashochaha, that you're grieving for something that is not deserving of grief. So this is how when one is out of touch with what the reality is, one mistakes the reality to be something else. And such a mistake produces grief as its product. So similarly, now from the example, from the drishtantaha, we come to the dashtantaha. From the example, we come to our situation. What is it? If I don't know who I really am, if I am out of touch with the reality of who I really am, then Atma Ajnanam is there. When Atma Ajnanam is there, then that is invariably followed by Adhyasa, the superimposition where I mistake something else to be what I am. Therefore, I take this Ahankara to be me. Meaning, I say that I am this body mind, this limited individuality is what we call the ahankara. I say that I am this limited body mind. And through this body mind, I'm connected to a few people, and therefore these people are mine, I am theirs. The mamakara also comes in. And because I am the limited individual, I am apurnaha, deficient, wanting, and inadequate. Apurnatvam comes in. So all of these ahankara, mamakara, and apurnatvam are a superimposition, a product of Atma Ajnanam. And once I become apurnaha, once I see myself as apurnaha, then leaning upon the world emotionally is inevitable. I become emotionally dependent upon the world. Ragaha comes in. Once ragaha has come in, then shokaha is inevitable because the world is unpredictable, uncontrollable, unsustainable. The world will change in ways that will cause emotional turmoil because I am emotionally dependent upon it. Therefore, shokaha is inevitable and mohaha is also inevitable. So this is how grief is a product of ajnana, atma ajnana. So now how is this grief to be removed? When darkness is the problem, the only solution is to bring in light. So when ignorance is the problem, there is only one solution: bring in knowledge. When rope ignorance is the problem, then the only solution is rope knowledge. Similarly, when Atma Jnanam is the problem, the only solution is Atma Jnanam. When the rope knowledge comes in, then it removes all these notions and misconceptions, false notions and misconceptions about what it is, that it is a snake, etc. All those notions go away. Similarly, when Atma Jnanam comes in, then all of the false notions about who I am, they go away. And since grief is a product of the false notions, the grief also goes away. Therefore, there is a certain beautiful section in the Bhashya of Bhagavad Gita that I'll read, and then we'll go over it briefly. Bhagavad Gita says, Tatraiva dharma sammudha chetasaha mahati shokasagare nimagnasya arjunasya अन्यत्र आत्मज्ञानात् उद्धरणम् अपश्यन् भगवान् वासुदेवः ततः कृपया अर्जुनम् उद्दिधारयिषुः आत्मज्ञानाय अवतारयन् आह. So this is the section. So Bhagavad Gita says, Dharma sammudha chetasaha mahati shokasagare nimagnasya arjunasya. Means Arjuna, who has got this dharma, who's a dharma sammudha chetas, meaning one whose mind has been afflicted by dharma sammudhata, meaning one who has this confusion of what is dharma and what is adharma. And mahati shokasagare nimagnasya means one who has fallen into this ocean, great ocean of grief. So, anyatra atmajnanat uddharanam apashyan. Bhagavan Krishna says that there is no other way to uplift this Arjuna other than to give him this atmajnanam. Anyatra Atma Jnanat Uddharanam Apashyan. Very important observation by Bhagavad-pada Shankaracharya. Then he says, Bhagavan Vasudevaha, Sri Krishna, Tatah Kripaya Arjunam Uddidharaishuhu. So because of his compassion, Kripaya, because of his compassion, Arjunam Uddidharaishuhu, desirous of uplifting Arjuna. From where? Tataha, meaning from this ocean of grief caused by ignorance. Atma Jnanaya Avatarayan Aha. He is now introducing Atma Jnanam. So this is the portion. Therefore, Sri Krishna says, Panditaha na anushochanti. Atma Jnanis do not grieve. So now there is another connection here that is interesting. In the beginning of this class, we had talked about the Anubandha Chatushtayam, the fourfold factors that bind the student to the study. We said that if the student has an understanding of these fourfold factors, then the student becomes a committed student for that particular text, for that particular study. So the first shloka also reveals this Anubandha Chatushtayam, not explicitly, but implicit in the first shloka is the Anubandha Chatushtayam. So the question is, what is it? What is the Anubandha Chatushtayam? It is these fourfold factors of Vishayaha, Prayojanam, Adhikari, and Sambandha. Vishayaha, what is the subject matter? Subject matter is Atma. Because what Bhagavan Krishna is talking about here is the Atma in order to give Atma Jnana. The subject matter, Vishaya, is Atma Panditaha na Anushochanti, Atma Jnaninaha na Anushochanti. Then what is the Prayojanam? The Prayojanam is Shoka Moha Nivrittihi, the removal of grief and sorrow. The Prayojanam is freedom from this disease of samsara that is afflicting Arjuna and the majority of the humanity. The Prayojanam is the freedom from the distressing symptoms of samsara that we call shokaha and mokaha. This is the Prayojanam, or in other words, the Prayojanam is mokshaha. In one word, if we have to say this, the Prayojanam is mokshaha, means freedom. Freedom from what? Freedom from samsara. Then the third question is who is the adhikari? Now it's very clear that the adhikari is somebody who is afflicted with the disease of samsara and is experiencing the distressing symptoms of samsara in the form of shoka and moha. Such a person is an adhikari who can benefit from the study of this text. And what is the sambandha, meaning what is the connection between this text and the Vishaya? So the text, the teaching of the Bhagavad Gita, what is the connection between the teaching of the Bhagavad Gita and the Vishaya, that is Atma? The Prayojanam, the sambandha is pramana, prameya sambandha. It has got a revealed relationship. The words of the Bhagavad Gita are the revealer. Revealer of what? The Atma is the revealed. And what is the connection between this teaching called the Bhagavad Gita and the Prayojana, which is freedom from samsara? What is the connection? So here, to see the connection, we have to introduce Atma Jnanam in the middle. And we have to ask the question, what is the connection between Bhagavad Gita and Atma Jnanam? It is pramana prama sambandha. Or in other words, the connection between the means of knowledge and the knowledge. It has got a producer-produced relationship. The words of the Bhagavad Gita are the producer of Atma Jnanam. Then the question is, what is the connection between this Atma Jnanam and the Prayojanam, which is freedom from samsara. We say that moksha eka sadhana sadhyam, moksha is accomplished only by one means, which is Atma Jnanam. The Atma Jnanam is the sadhanam, and moksha is the sadhyam. Atma Jnanam is the means, and moksha is the end. So the first shloka brings out the Anubandha Chatushtayam. Now the teaching progresses from the next verse, and Krishna, Bhagavan Shri Krishna, teaches from three viewpoints. And what are the three viewpoints? The first viewpoint is Adhyatmika Drishtihi. Adhyatmika Drishtihi, where Bhagavan teaches what the Atma is, what is the nature of the Atma. And Bhagavan says that knowing this nature of the Atma, there is no cause for sorrow for one who knows the nature of Atma. And then Bhagavan comes down to a second viewpoint, that in case you are still digesting what I have talked about, the Atma, then Bhagavan teaches from the Dharmika Drishti also, from the ethical standpoint, from the Dharmika Drishti, that fighting is the right thing to do for Dharma Samsthapanartham. And if one is still trying to absorb what has been said in the Adhyatmika Drishti and Dharmika Drishti viewpoints, and there's a third viewpoint also, which is Laukika Drishti, which is from the worldly viewpoint also, that Bhagavan teaches that withdrawing from this war would set a wrong example and bring Arjuna dishonor. That is from the Laukika Drishti. But primarily the teaching of the Bhagavad Gita is from the Adhyatmika Drishti, from the standpoint of Atma. So now, before we get into what Bhagavan teaches from the next verse, some background is necessary. And this is why we say that the study of some Prakarana Granthas, like the Tattva Bodha, etc., helps understand the Bhagavad Gita in a much more comprehensive manner. And therefore, we have to get into some background that Bhagavan does not start off with in the very beginning. And we have to have some background about the Atma in order to understand the first verse that Sri Krishna teaches. So the question is, what is the Atma? So the Atma, you look at the word Atma, it's a Nakaranta Shabdaha, Nakaranta Atman Shabdaha. And in the Pullinga, Prathama Vibhakti Ekavachanam, it becomes Atma. So the word Atma means the real self. In the vision of Vedanta, Atma means the real self or the real I. So now the question is, why do we say real self? Why do we need to use the adjective real before the self? Because there is a possibility of a mistaken self. Just like we have seen the snake. In reality, what is really there is a snake, but then it is mistaken to be a rope. Why? In reality, what is there is a rope, but it is mistaken to be a snake. Sometimes the other thing can also happen. What is really there is a rope, but it is mistaken to be a snake. Why? Because of rope ajnanam, rope ignorance. Similarly, if I don't know who I really am, then I make a mistake about myself. I take myself to be something else other than what I really am. Why? Because of self-ignorance. So Vedanta says that the idea of self that you are entertaining is the mistaken self. It is not the real self. That is why we have to use the adjective real before the self. So I have to first understand why Vedanta is saying that there is a mistake. Why is there a mistake, first of all? Because I don't see any mistake in taking myself to be this body-mind. It looks pretty airtight to me. So why is there a mistake? Vedanta points out, and this is where we have to use a certain prakriya in Vedanta called Drik Drishya Viveka. So Vedanta points out that all of my experiences, if I take any experience, it is reducible to two entities. Drigdrishyau dvau padarthaustaha paraspara vilakshano. In any experience, any experience is reducible to two entities, the drig and the drishyam. The seer and the seen, the knower and the known, the subject and the object. The seer is the one who's seeing, knower is the one who's knowing, the subject is the one who is experiencing. Seer, knower, subject, called drik. And then there's the drishyam, meaning the seen, the known, the experienced, called the object, called the drishyam. Now Vedanta points out two things here, two laws, so to say, two Vedantic laws. The first is that the knower is always different from the known. Knower is always different from the known. That is the first law. The drik is always different from the drishyam. And the second law is the attributes of the drishyam always belong to the drishyam and never to the drik. The attributes of the known always belong to the known and never to the knower. So these are the two laws. So now let us take an example where I see a pot. I see a pot. So when I see a pot, now the pot is the known object, whereas I am the seer, I am the knower. So it is very clear to me that the Vedantic law is true, that I, the knower, am different from the known pot. There is no confusion here. And the attributes of the pot, like the roundness of the pot, the color of the pot, the size of the pot, they all belong to the pot and not to me, the knower. Very clear. So it is very clear that the pot is not I. I call the pot not I. The I is here, the pot is not I. So I never mistake the pot to be myself. So now let us take another example, this cloth, which is very close to me. Right? So when I take this cloth, again the cloth is known, is a known object, whereas I am the knower of the cloth. So I, the knower of the cloth, am different from this cloth, very clear to me. And the attributes of this cloth, like this white color, or this border, the orange border, etc., they belong to the cloth, not to me. Again, very clear. So the cloth is not I. And I don't mistake myself to be this cloth. So far, no confusion. So when it comes to things of the world, there is very clear distinction between the knower and the known. I say I am different, and this part is different, this cloth is different. I address myself as I, and I address everything else as this. But now let us take this body. This is where things start to get somewhat confusing. I call it this body. For example, the doctor asks me which hand is paining. I say this hand is paining. So I address the body as this. And I know the body. I see the body as an object. But then I begin to say, I say that I am this body. And I am 5 feet 8 inches tall. I am 65 kgs. And I am brown. So the complexion of the body is my complexion. The attributes of the body become my attributes. Even though the body is addressed as this, the body is known, the body is an object, whereas I am the knower, I am the subject, I am the drik, the body is drishyam. In spite of that, I say I am the body and the attributes of the body are my attributes. Now Vedanta comes in and says that we should apply the Vedantic law here also. That you are the knower, body is known. The knower is always different from the known, and therefore there is another knower here who is different from the body that is known. And the attributes of the body belong to the body, not to this knower. Much like the attributes of the pot and the cloth belong to the pot and the cloth, not to the knower. So the body should be not I. Now when I hear this, I protest. I protest, saying that the body cannot be equated to this pot or this cloth. Why? Because there is sentiency in the body. The body, I can feel a sensation of touch in this body. I feel connected to this body. I don't feel connected to the pot or the cloth. So wherever the sentiency extends, and the sentiency extends only up to this perimeter of the body. So up to this is the I. Up to this is the knower. Up to this is me. And therefore the body is different. It's called Dehatmavadaha. Majority of the humanity is Dehatmavadi, meaning that majority of the humanity says the Deha is Atma. That I, the real self, is this body. So now we will do a few thought experiments, a couple of thought experiments here. In fact, these are some of these examples are modern examples, and they are not available in the traditional Vedantic texts in the same form. And I first heard it in one of Swami Tadatmananda's talks, and I thought it was a pretty creative example. And the example is that let us take this cloth. So now let us say that this person, that I am on a certain medication. I take this medication. And medication is for curing some problem I'm having. But as a side effect of the medication is that the nerve endings on my skin start to grow into this cloth that is around me. They start to grow into this cloth. Now, what will happen then is that the sensation of touch will start to appear in this cloth because the cloth has been pervaded by all my nerves. So anytime somebody touches this cloth, I get this feeling that I am being touched. So now in this situation, I would begin to say that I am this cloth. This cloth is a part of my body like any other part of my body that is pervaded by touch. This cloth is also a part of my body. And then I would start to talk about the attributes of the cloth as being my attributes, saying that I used to be brown, but now I am white. And I also have a border. I have this orange and blue border now. But that is That is ridiculous. Just because this cloth became pervaded by a sense of touch, now I am starting to say I am this cloth. And if somebody starts to cut this cloth, then I would say I am being cut. Why are you hurting me? So such statements one begins to make because of the understanding that this is me and the attributes of this are my attributes. So this shows that the body is taken to be different from the pot or the cloth because of the sensation of touch that pervades this body. That is why I'm saying the body is different from the cloth or the pot, or cloth or the pot. Even though the cloth is known, the pot is known, the body is known, and therefore everything should be categorized as known, and I should be saying I'm different from the cloth, pot, and the body. I don't extend the law to the body. I say that I am the body, the pot and cloth are different. Why do I say that? Because sentiency pervades this body. And if that sentiency were to pervade my cloth, I would include the cloth in the I. I would only reject the pot as being not I. So it is because of the sensation of touch that pervades the entire body. Now, let us take another example where let us see what will happen if the body were to lose the sensation of touch. So again, this is an example that Swamiji had pointed out, which is that when we go to a dentist, then I get a certain anesthetic on my teeth. Because of that and all the surgery that he does, whatever he does, the whole area is swollen. The cheek becomes swollen. And there is no sensation of touch. But then that part almost seems like somebody has stuck some foreign object on my body. That is the effect when a particular part of the body becomes numb. So what will happen now? Let's extend this. If that whole body becomes numb for some reason because of some medication, then to me the body would also appear very much like the pot or the cloth. The entire body would appear like the pot or the cloth. And for somebody who has been living under these conditions, let us say, somebody who was since a child had some problem and then the whole body became numb, to that person the whole body may appear to be exactly like a pot or a cloth. There is no connection with the pot or the cloth. Similarly, there is no connection with his body. So the presence of sentiency in this body is what makes me call this body I. And if this sentiency gets extended to the cloth, then I include the cloth also in the I. And if the sentiency gets dropped from the body, then I will not include this body in the I. So really speaking, my I-ness is actually associated with the sentiency and not the body. Wherever the sentiency extends, I'm calling that I. It happens to extend over the entire body, so I'm including this body in the I. So that sentiency is what I am after. That sentiency is what makes me call this I. So then the question is, that is the sentiency inherent in the body? Is the sentiency the nature of this body? So Vedanta points out that sentiency is not the nature of this body. His body doesn't have inherent consciousness. Why does Vedanta say so? The first point is that the body is matter. As we have seen, Panchikrita Panchamaha Bhutaihi Kritam. Body is matter. It is made of the grossified 5 elements. Akashaha, Vayuhu, Agnihi, Jalam, and Prithvi. Again, this was discussed in Tattva Bodha. Panchikrita Panchamaha Bhutaihi Kritam Satkarmajanyam Sukha Dukkhadi Bhogayatanam Asti jayate vardhate viparinamate apakshiyate vinashyati iti षड्विकारवत् एतत् स्थूल शरीरम. This is the sthula sharira, made of sthula pancha mahabhutas. And these pancha mahabhutas don't have inherently any consciousness. Because it is matter. Even science agrees that matter is matter. The body is matter. Science agrees that this body is matter. So, being matter, Vedanta says there is no inherent consciousness here. Then there is another reason also. Vedanta points out why this body doesn't have inherent consciousness. Why consciousness is not the nature of this body. Because if something is the nature of something, then that something should never separate from that. Like heat is the nature of fire. It is impossible to separate heat and fire. Sweetness is the nature of sugar. It is impossible to separate sweetness and sugar. If consciousness was the nature of this body, it should be impossible to separate consciousness from this body. But then we all know that consciousness leaves this body. When? During death. During death, this body, this matter becomes very, very obvious. You beat, you touch that person, slap that person, shake that person, there is no response. As if you are touching, slapping, shaking a log of wood. So if consciousness was the inherent nature of the body, it should never depart the body, but it does depart the body. This indicates that consciousness is not the nature of the body. So two reasons: the body is matter and consciousness departs the body. Because of this, consciousness cannot be the nature of this body. It is not an inherent property of this body. So then the question is, how do we experience sentiency in this body? Because my I-ness should really be associated with that which is sentient, which is truly sentient consciousness by nature. That is what my I should go towards. So how do we experience sentiency in this body? And we can extend it to be the mind and senses also. Because Vedanta says that even the mind is matter. Except that it is made of much more subtler matter. It is made of the Sukshma Pancha Mahabhutas. Apanchikrita Pancha Mahabhutaiः Kritam. Sthula Shariram is Panchikrita Pancha Mahabhutaiः Kritam. Sukshma Shariram is Apanchikrita Pancha Mahabhutaiः Kritam. So, what is it then that makes this body mind sense complex sentient? If the sentiency is not inherent in the body mind sense complex, because they are all matter, just like pot and cloth, they are just matter, then what brings in this sentiency? That is the question. So Vedanta says that there is another principle here. There is another principle here that brings in the sentiency from which this body mind sense complex borrows sentiency. So we take our favorite example of the moon. Now the moon is brightly lit on a Paurnami night. You see the full circle and brightly lit. Now the stars have their own intrinsic light. And the sun, being a star, is self-luminous. It has its own intrinsic light. But the planets and satellites, they are not self-luminous. So how is it that the moon has this light, which is clearly visible? On the Purnami night, it appears on the moon. We say that since the moon doesn't have its own light, the light that appears on the moon is borrowed light, not the moon's own light. So the light is on the moon, but the light is not off the moon. So similarly, we say that this matter is insentient by nature. The body, mind, sense complex is insentient by nature. It doesn't have any inherent sentiency of its own. But then sentiency appears in this body-mind complex. Why does it appear? Because it borrows this sentiency from another principle. So consciousness is on the body and mind, but consciousness is not of the body and mind. Then the next question is, from whom is this consciousness borrowed? From whom or what is this consciousness borrowed? So this is where we bring in the Atma. The source of this consciousness cannot be matter, because matter inherently doesn't have any consciousness. So the source of this consciousness has to be non-material. This consciousness has to be non-material. It cannot be matter. Why? Because matter doesn't have any inherent consciousness. Matter itself has to borrow consciousness. A beggar cannot finance a startup. Why? Because the beggar himself is surviving on borrowed funds. How can the beggar finance a startup? Therefore, whatever is lending this consciousness cannot be material. This is another Vedantic law. Consciousness is not matter. So there is another principle that is non-material, which we call Atma or consciousness, that is lending consciousness to this body, mind, sense complex that is inherently insentient. And this other principle, which is the lender of consciousness, is consciousness by nature. Meaning that just like heat is the nature of fire, heat and fire can never be separated. Sweetness is the nature of sugar, sweetness and sugar can never be separated. Similarly, Atma is of the nature of consciousness. Atma and consciousness can never be separated. Atma is consciousness. So now, we call this Chit Swarupam. So Atma is Chit Swarupaha. As we have seen in Tattvabodha, Satchidananda Swarupaha Atma. Atma is Sat, Chit, Ananda Swarupaha. We will discuss Sat and Ananda Swarupaha sometime else. In fact, Sat Swarupa is going to come very soon in the Bhagavad Gita also. We will discuss that when we come to that verse. But here we are talking about Chit Swarupaha, meaning Atma is of the nature of consciousness. So there are three messages that we have to understand from our discussion. And the first message, to understand the first message, we'll go back to our moon example. Now we said the light is on the moon, but the light is not off the moon. Therefore, we can derive 5 principles of sunlight from this. 5 principles of sunlight. That sunlight is not a part, product, or property of the moon. This is the first feature of sunlight. Sunlight is not a part, product, or property of the moon. Number 2, sunlight is an independent principle that pervades the moon and illumines the moon. Very clear. Sunlight belongs to the sun. It has got nothing to do with the moon except that it pervades the moon and illuminates it. And sunlight is not limited. This is a third feature. Sunlight is not limited by the boundaries of the moon. In fact, sunlight is all pervading. But it happens to manifest on the moon because it needs a medium to manifest. The sunlight is not limited by the boundaries of the moon. And the fourth principle is that sunlight is not affected. Sunlight continues to exist even if the moon is destroyed. And imagine that somehow if the moon was to be destroyed, then that would not affect the sunlight at all. And the sunlight that continues to exist in case the moon goes away That is not visible. That is not visible, not because it does not exist, but because there is no medium to manifest it. This is the fifth principle. So now, having looked at this in the example of the sunlight and the moon, we can extend it to the body, mind, sense complex and Atma. So we can come up with the 5 principles. Swamiji talks about the 5 features of consciousness. That consciousness is not a part, product, or property of the body, of the body mind. Consciousness is an independent principle that pervades the body mind and enlimens the body mind. Consciousness is not limited by the boundaries of this body mind. And consciousness continues to exist even if the body mind is destroyed. And a consciousness that continues to exist even when the body mind is destroyed. It is not possible for that to transact, not because it does not exist, but because there is no medium for it to manifest. So let us look at each of these features briefly. That consciousness is not a part, product, or property of the body mind. We said that consciousness is not a part of this body mind. Exactly like sunlight is not a part of the moon. Body has parts like the left hand, right hand, etc. But they are all matter. Consciousness is not a part of the body mind. Consciousness is not a product of the body mind also, exactly like the sunlight is not a product of the moon. Consciousness, the body has got its products, like saliva, or digestive juices, enzymes, etc. White blood cells, etc. They all matter. Consciousness is not a product of this body mind also. This is where Vedanta and science disagree. Vedanta says consciousness is not a product of the body mind. The science says consciousness is somehow a product of these biochemical reactions in the body. And science, in the vision of Vedanta, science is totally wrong here. Consciousness can never be produced from matter. It's a fundamental Vedantic law. And therefore, science is doing a lot of research and trying to figure out from where this consciousness comes. But science is clueless in this regard. And Vedanta asserts that science will continue to remain clueless about the origin of consciousness. Consciousness is not a product of this body mind. Consciousness is not a property of this body mind also, exactly like sunlight is not a property of the moon. The moon has properties like its circular shape or its size. Sunlight is not a property like this. The body has its properties like its height and the weight, etc. Consciousness is not a property of the body mind. Then the second feature is that consciousness is an independent principle that pervades the body mind and illumines and enlivens the body mind. Exactly like sunlight is an independent principle that pervades the moon and illumines the moon. Then the third feature is that consciousness is not limited by the boundaries of this body mind, exactly like sunlight is not limited by the boundaries of the moon. So consciousness pervades beyond the limits of this body mind. In fact, Vedanta will point out, and even Bhagavad Gita will talk about all of this, that consciousness is sarvagataha, meaning it is all pervasive. So it has no spatial limitation. Then the fourth feature is that consciousness continues to exist even when the body mind is destroyed, exactly like the sunlight continues to exist even if the moon were to be destroyed. That is because consciousness is not a part, product, or property of the body mind. If something was a part, product, or property of the body-mind, then that would be destroyed if the body-mind is destroyed. But since consciousness is an independent principle, and whenever we say consciousness, we are referring to Atma. They are both the same. So Atma, consciousness, is an independent principle that pervades the body-mind and illumines the body-mind, and therefore consciousness is not destroyed when the body-mind is destroyed. And therefore consciousness doesn't have the same time-wise boundary that the body-mind has. Body-mind may go, the consciousness continues to exist. And the fifth principle is that the consciousness that continues to exist cannot transact, not because it is not there, but because it needs a medium to manifest. Exactly like the sunlight is not visible if the moon were to go. The sunlight needs a reflecting medium in order to become visible. Similarly, the consciousness needs a medium of the body-mind to express as the sentiency in the body-mind. So these are the 5 principles of consciousness. This is the first message from our discussion. And the second message is that every individual is a mixture of Atma and body-mind. There are 2 principles here, matter and consciousness. Every individual is a mixture of matter and consciousness, Atma and Anatma, consciousness and matter, Purushaha and Prakriti, Apara, Para Prakritihi and Apara Prakritihi, Brahman and Maya. These are the different synonyms that are used. Every individual is a mixture of Atma and Anatma. And the Anatma can be divided into 3-fold Anatma. The Sthula Sharira means this gross body. The Sukshma Sharira, which includes the mind, intellect, sense organs, prana, etc. And the Karana Sharira, which is an unmanifest body, which is the cause of this gross body and subtle body. So the Anatma has 3 components, the gross, the subtle, and the causal, the Sthula, Sukshma, and Karana Shariras. The Sthula Sharira is made of gross matter, the Sukshma Sharira is made of subtle matter, and the Karana Sharira is made of unmanifest matter. They are all matter, no inherent consciousness. Where does the consciousness come from? From the Atma, that is of the nature of consciousness. So every individual has got these 2 components, Atma and 3-fold Anatma, the Sharira Trayam or the 3-fold Anatma. So now the third, this is the second message. Every individual is a mixture of Atma and Anatma. Now the third message is which of these two should I identify with? Which of these 2 is the I? Which of these 2 is the real self? So here, there seems to be a choice. Should I pick to identify with this body-mind complex, or should I choose to identify with the Atma? That is of the nature of consciousness. So we say that identification with the Anatma results in endless suffering. The Anatma, because the body-mind sense complex comes and goes, it is subject to ups and downs, it is born, it is decaying, it is dying. And therefore, identification with the Anatma is the gateway to Ahankara, Mamakara. This is Ahankara, Mamakara. And is the gateway to Apurnatvam. I will feel deficient, wanting, inadequate, identifying with the body-mind. And then Ragaha is inevitable, Shokaha and Mohaha are inevitable. On the other hand, if I identify with the Atma, that is of the nature of consciousness, then the Atma is changeless. The Atma is Nityaha. Therefore, understanding that I am the Nitya Atma is the key, holds the key to freedom from this disease of samsara with all of its distressing symptoms. Understanding that I am the Atma holds the key to freedom, moksha, which is freedom from the disease of samsara. So the ignorant, one who is ignorant of the Atma, has no choice but to identify with the Anatma. So the third message is that the entire Vedantic sadhana, the entire pursuit of Vedanta is shifting the location of where my I resides. What do I see as myself? What do I understand as myself? Vedanta points out that I should come to an understanding that Atma is the real I. Then what about the body-mind complex? The body-mind complex is an instrument through which I interact with the world. Body-mind complex becomes an instrument of interaction, but I am the Atma. So I use the body-mind complex. I am a user of the body-mind complex, but Vedanta says don't get attached to this body-mind complex because it's purely an instrument of transaction. This body-mind complex, being matter, is subject to decay, change, and death, and therefore don't place your I in it. That's why mano buddhya hankara chittani naham nacha shrotra jihve nacha ghrana netre nacha vyoma bhumir na tejo na vayuhu chidananda rupa shivoham shivoham. That's why we say tamaso ma jyotirgamaya, meaning from darkness may I go to light, meaning from ignorance may I come to the knowledge. Mrityorma amritam gamaya, meaning take me from mortality to immortality. How do I go from mortality to immortality? The mortal body mind can never become immortal. So going from mortality to immortality essentially means shifting the understanding of who I am from this body-mind complex to Atma. So this is the background that we need to understand the first verse of the Bhagavad Gita. So with this background, we will go to the first verse, just one point before that. That in the prior verse, Bhagavan Krishna said, Ashochan anvashochaha tvam, that you are grieving over something that is not worthy of grief. So the next verse clarifies that why are we saying that Arjuna was saying that all of these people are going to die, and therefore I am grieving. Therefore, Bhagavan Krishna is saying these people are not worthy of grief. Why are they ashocyaha? Why are they not worthy of grief? Bhagavan explains in the next verse. Because Atma, every individual is really speaking Atma, and Atma is nityaha. Atma doesn't have the time boundary. And therefore, all of us are immortal. This is what Bhagavan is saying in the next verse. We will read that. Natvevaham jatu nasam
नत्वेवाहं जातु नासम्
न त्वं नेमे जनाधिपाः
न त्वं नेमे जनाधिपाः
न चैव न भविष्यामः
न चैव न भविष्यामः
सर्वे वयमतः परम्.
सर्वे वयमतः परम्.
Let us take the example of a pot again. Now, if you take any object in the world like a pot, then the pot is born on a certain date. Let us say the pot was created on the 1st of January 2026. So we can say the pot has a date of birth. The pot was born on 1st of January 2026. But before the 1st of January 2026, the pot did not exist. And therefore we say that the pot was non-existent in the past sometime. So we say the pot has prior non-existence. Pot has prior non-existence. There is a technical term for this, which is called prag abhavaha. Abhavaha means non-existence, and prag means earlier, before. So the pot has prag abhavaha, meaning the pot has prior non-existence. And when did the pot lose its prior non-existence? On the 1st of January 2026, when it became existent. Similarly, the pot can get broken on a certain date. So let us say the pot gets broken today, right now, on 12th of April 2026. So now the pot has death. The pot is broken on 12th of April 2026. So after the pot is broken, it has got non-existence, which is called pradhvamsa bhavaha, meaning the pot has posterior non-existence. So this is the biography of the pot. It has got prior non-existence, then existence in the middle, and posterior non-existence. But the Atma is not like this pot. The Atma has no birth. There was never a date when the Atma was born. Therefore, the Atma doesn't have any prior non-existence. Similarly, the Atma doesn't have any death also. And because the Atma never dies, body-mind may go away, the Atma continues to survive. Since the Atma doesn't have any death, we say the Atma doesn't have any posterior non-existence. No pragabhavaha and no pradhvamsa bhavaha. This is indicated in the current shloka, where Bhagavan says, here we will look at the current shloka after breaking the sandhis. So natvevaham jatunasam natvam neme janadhipaha. If we break the sandhis, it becomes na tu eva aham jatu na asam na tvam na ime janadhipaha. And na cha eva na bhavishyamaha sarve vayam atah param. Sarve vayam atah param. So na tu eva aham jatu na asam. Aham jatu na asam. We will take that part first. Aham jatu na asam. Jatu means ever. Aham means I. Na asam means did not exist. So I did not ever exist. I did not ever exist. So we can add before this birth. Before this birth. I did not ever exist. This is what all of us think. All of us think I did not ever exist before this birth. So aham jatu na asam. I did not ever exist before this birth. This is what the general thinking is. So is this true? Bhagavan says this is not true. Na tu eva iti na tu eva. Aham jatu na tu asam iti na tu eva. Bhagavan is using a double negative here. So it is not true that I did not ever exist. This is what it means. Which means, if you convert it into positive language, it means I have always existed. As Atma, I have always existed. There is no prag abhava, meaning that I don't have any prior non-existence. This body-mind was born. Bhagavan can say this body-mind was born on Janmashtami day. But as Atma, Bhagavan is saying, as Atma, I always existed before the birth of this body. So one may say, Bhagavan can say so. Bhagavan has always existed, all right. But what about me? What about me? So Bhagavan says, Natvam, meaning, Tvam jatu na asihi. That you did not exist. You did not exist before your birth. You did not exist before your birth. Bhagavan is telling Arjuna. You did not exist before your birth. That is what generally people think. That is also not true. Is this true? That is also not true. Iti na tu eva, na tu eva, na tvevaham, na tu eva. That na tu eva has to be applied to all of these, carried over. So that you did not ever exist before this birth, which you generally think is also not true. So you as the Atma have always existed. You as the Atma have always existed. You also have no prior non-existence. And when Bhagavan is addressing Arjuna as you, we should understand Bhagavan is addressing all of us also. Bhagavan is telling all of us that you have always existed. You think that your existence started with this birth. That is not true. You have always existed. Even before this birth, you existed. But then Arjuna is concerned about Bhishma and Drona and all of these other kings who are going to die in this battle. So Bhagavan says, Ime janadhipaha. So in the previous line, he says, before we come to the second line, Bhagavan is saying, Natvam na ime janadhipaha. Natvam na ime janadhipaha. So, ime janadhipaha jatu na asan. So these kings did not exist. That is what we all think. Before their births, these kings did not exist. Ime janadhipaha jatu na asan. This is what we generally think. Iti na tu eva. This is also not true. So these kings also have always existed. So these kings also don't have any prior non-existence. So which means Bhagavan is saying, Atma, they have always existed. All of us have always existed as the Atma. There never was a time when I, you, or these people were not there. So here when Krishna is saying aham, tvam, te, Krishna is referring to everybody's Atma component. Saying that all of us are immortal. So one may say, okay, you're saying we always existed in the past. This is what you're saying. But then what about the future? After the death of this body, after the death of these bodies, what will happen? So Bhagavan says in the next line, Na cha eva na bhavishyamaha sarve vayam atah param. So atah param means, ataha means asmat deha vinasha. Asmat deha vinashat means after the destruction of this body. Asmat deha vinashat ataha. And param means uttara kale api, meaning after, in the time that follows the destruction of this body. Ataf param means in the time that follows the destruction of this body. Bhagavan says, Vayam sarve na bhavishyamaha. Vayam sarve na bhavishyamaha means we all will not exist, is what we commonly think. We all will not exist. Vayam sarve na bhavishyamaha. That is also not true. Na cha eva. That is also not true. That means that we all will continue to exist after the destruction of our bodies, and Atma will continue to exist. So Bhagavan is essentially saying that bodies may come and go, but this body is only an instrument of transaction for the Atma. The Atma doesn't come and go. For example, if I'm speaking to somebody on the phone, Swamiji gives this example, you're speaking to somebody on the phone, and that person is also talking on his phone. You're talking on your phone. If we give mobile phone examples these days, everybody understands. So I'm talking on my phone, that person is talking on his phone. And suddenly his mobile phone dies. So when his instrument of transaction dies, we don't say he is dead. He continues to be there. So that person contacts me after a few days again, saying that day when I was talking to you, my phone died. and now I am talking to you using a new form. So similarly, the Atma is the one that is interacting. The body-mind is an instrument of interaction. This particular body-mind may go away, but then the Atma interacts with another body-mind. The Atma interacts with the world. So as Atma, we have no prior non-existence and no posterior non-existence. We have no posterior non-existence is what Bhagavan is saying in the second line. So as Atma, we don't have birth and death. As Atma, there is no prior non-existence and no posterior non-existence. That's what it means to have no birth and death. The bodies, as bodies, we have prior non-existence and posterior non-existence. As bodies, we have birth and death. So what this means is that as Atma, we were always there. Which means that even before this Srishti came into existence, even before this universe became manifest, Atma, as Atma, we were still there. And not just before this Srishti, even before the countless Srishtis, before this one, as Atma, we have always been there. And similarly, even after there's pralayam, even after the entire Srishti goes away, as Atma, we will continue to be there. Vayam sarve bhavishyamaha, na bhavishyamaha iti natu eva. We will continue to exist even after the entire Srishti has pralayam. And not just after this pralayam, even after countless pralayams after this pralayam, we will continue to exist as the Atma. Therefore, as Atma, we are Nityaha, we are immortal, is what Bhagavan is saying. And in fact, Bhagavad clarifies in his Bhashya that here the plurals are used. Bhagavan is talking about many here. He's talking about I, you, and these kings. Bhagavan is using plural here. But that doesn't indicate plurality of Atmas. It is not that each of us has got our own private Atma. There is only one Atma. We are all that one Atma. This all will come. But in the vision of Vedanta, there are not multiple Atmas. We should not leave this shloka thinking that each of us has got our own Atma. There is one Atma that each of us really are. That Atma was there countless srishtis before this one and will continue to be there even after countless pralayams after this pralayam. So in effect, Bhagavan is saying that there are only two things in this creation. Eventually we will dismiss the two also. But right now we have reduced everything to two. There appear to be so many things. We have reduced everything to two. There is one Atma and then there is Anatma. So that one Atma that is there is Ashocya. Bhagavan is saying both are Ashocya, both are not worthy of grief. This one Atma is not worthy of grief. Why? Because it is immortal. And therefore it is Ashocya. You do not grieve for something that is immortal. On the other hand, then what is left? There is Anatma. And it is impossible to keep Anatma from changing. Change is the nature of Anatma, like heat is the nature of fire. Do we grieve that fire is hot? Do we grieve about the nature of any particular thing? There is no point about grieving about the nature of anything. The only thing a wise man does is accept the nature of things as unchangeable. That is what is called the nature of a thing. And therefore, even Anatma, who the change of Anatma cannot be stopped because it is the nature of Anatma, and therefore Anatma is also Ashocya. Anatma, all that Anatma requires is acceptance and not grief. And therefore both are Ashocya. And therefore you are grieving because you don't have a proper understanding of what is Atma and what is Anatma. When you properly understand Atma and Anatma, you discover that there is nothing really that is worthy of grief. What is not changing, what cannot change, will not change. and there is nothing to grieve there. And what keeps changing, you cannot stop it from changing, and therefore again there is nothing to grieve there. So again, as we understand the nature of Atma and Anatma, when the facts of existence become clear, then there is no room for sorrow. So this is the essence of the 12th shloka. We will stop at this point and continue in the next class. Om Purnamadah Purnamidam Purnat Purnamudachyate Purnasya Purnamadaya Purnameva Vashishyate. Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. Hari Om Shri Guru Namaha. Hari Om.